They did not take her room first. They took the blanket. Hannah Whitaker stood in the doorway of the attic and stared at the narrow bed beneath the slanted roof, where the old wool blanket should have been folded at the foot like the last soft thing in her life. It was gone. The sheet beneath it looked thin and gray in the winter light, and the cold from the window slipped across the floorboards as if it had been waiting for permission to enter. For a moment, Hannah did not move. She only listened to the house below, to the bright rush of footsteps, the snap of fabric, the clink of teacups, the warm laughter that never rose this high unless someone wanted her to come down and work. The Whitaker house was glowing tonight. Every room below the attic had been filled with candles and pine garlands because Alpha King Callum Blackthorne was expected to pass through the winter market by morning, and every family in Greyhaven Pack wanted to look worthy of the North. Hannah had polished the brass railings until her fingers ached. She had carried split firewood from the shed in 2 trips because no one else wanted snow on their boots. She had mended the pearl buttons on Claire's new ivory gown, while Claire complained that the sleeves made her look provincial. And now, when Hannah had come upstairs to rest for 1 hour before the market opened before dawn, the one blanket that still held the faint scent of her mother was missing. Looking for something? Marjorie Whitaker's voice came from the stairs behind her, smooth and dry as folded paper. Hannah turned. Her stepmother stood halfway up the steps, wrapped in a wine-red shawl, her pale face calm beneath perfectly pinned hair. Behind her, Claire leaned against the banister in her new gown, smiling as if she already knew the ending. Hannah's hand went to the silver locket at her throat. "Where is my blanket?" Marjorie sighed, as though Hannah had asked for a jewel instead of warmth. "Sold." The word was small. It still emptied the room. "Sold," Hannah repeated. "It was mine." Claire laughed softly. "It was old. Honestly, Hannah, it looked like something a stray dog would refuse." Hannah looked back at the bed. The blanket had been patched in 3 places, thin at the corners, and not nearly warm enough for the worst nights. But her mother had wrapped it around her shoulders when she was a child and told her that winter only felt endless when no one loved you through it. Hannah's throat tightened. "You had no right." Marjorie's eyes cooled. "A poor Omega does not need comfort. She needs usefulness." The blanket paid for extra satin ribbon for Claire's presentation cloak. That cloak may help this family secure favor when the Alpha King arrives. Hannah felt the cold window at her back and the colder truth before her. In this house, even her warmth could be traded for someone else's future. Claire tilted her head, studying Hannah's old blue dress, her pale hands, the locket she still clutched like a prayer. "Do not look so wounded. You still have that little rag around your shoulders." Hannah glanced at the thin gray scarf hanging from a nail near the bed. It was barely long enough to cover both arms, but it was all she had left. Marjorie turned toward the stairs. "Come down in 10 minutes. The floor in the front hall needs washing again, and Claire's hem is uneven." Hannah did not answer. She waited until their footsteps faded, until laughter and warmth swallowed them below. Then she crossed the attic, took the scarf from the nail, and wrapped it around her shoulders. It did almost nothing against the cold. Still, she stood straighter. Her mother's silver locket rested over her heart, quiet and cold. Hannah closed her fingers around it and whispered into the empty room. "They can sell the blanket. They cannot sell what she left inside me." Downstairs, another burst of laughter rose beside the fire. Outside, snow began to fall over Greyhaven, and beyond the northern road, a king no one expected early was already riding toward the market. The Whitaker house did not grow quieter after Hannah found the empty bed. It grew brighter, warmer, louder. Downstairs, every window spilled gold across the snowy yard while the attic stayed blue with cold, as if the house itself had chosen which rooms deserved firelight. Hannah moved through the front hall with a wash bucket in both hands, the thin gray scarf wrapped tightly around her shoulders. It kept slipping as she worked, sliding down her arms whenever she bent to scrub the floorboards, but she tucked it back again and again without complaint. The brass lanterns along the walls shone because she had polished them. The pine garlands above the staircase smelled fresh because she had tied them. The honey cakes cooling in the kitchen had risen properly because she had watched the oven when everyone else was too busy admiring Claire's gown. Yet when guests began arriving from nearby pack houses, no one saw Hannah as part of the welcome. They stepped around her bucket. They handed her empty cups. They asked whether the fire could be built higher, whether the cider could be sweeter, whether someone could wipe snow from the entry stones before the royal party passed through Greyhaven Market. Someone. Always someone. Never Hannah, unless the work was unpleasant. Claire swept down the stairs just after midnight in her ivory gown and new satin-trimmed cloak, the one bought with Hannah's blanket. The fabric glowed creamy white in the candlelight, soft and thick at the shoulders. Hannah's hands paused on the wet cloth. For one heartbeat, she imagined the weight of that warmth. Then Claire turned, letting the cloak flare as the women in the hall admired it. "Do you think the Alpha King will notice?" one of them asked. Claire smiled. "If he has taste." Laughter filled the hall. Marjorie noticed Hannah watching, and her expression sharpened. "The kitchen, Hannah." "Now." Hannah lowered her eyes and lifted the bucket. The water sloshed against her skirt as she carried it through the side corridor, past the closed parlor where the fireplace roared high enough to make the walls glow. In the kitchen, heat rolled from the stove, but she was not allowed to stand near it long. There were trays to carry, cups to rinse, crumbs to sweep, apples to slice, and a stack of wool coats to brush clean for guests who had arrived with more warmth than she owned. Her fingers were stiff from cold water, but she worked carefully. Care had always been her small rebellion. If they treated her like a shadow, she would still move through the world without breaking what she touched. Near 2 in the morning, Marjorie entered with a list folded in one hand. "You will go to the winter market before dawn," she said. "Take the bundle of old linens, the cracked tea set, and those boots from the storage room. Sell what you can before the royal procession reaches the square." Hannah looked up from the tray of cups. "Before dawn. The market opens early today because of the king. I still have the front steps to clear." "Then clear them faster." Claire appeared behind her mother, fastening pearl pins into her hair. "And do not embarrass us by looking pitiful. Wrap that scarf properly if you must wear it." Hannah touched the thin fabric at her shoulders. "It is all I have left." Claire's smile did not soften. "Then perhaps learn to look grateful for it." The words settled quietly, like snow over a grave. Hannah picked up the bundle of linens and tied it with twine. She did not ask for gloves. She knew the answer. Outside, the winter air struck her cheeks as she stepped onto the back porch. The stars were sharp over Greyhaven, and the road to the market curved through drifts of clean snow, pale beneath the moon. Behind her, the Whitaker house shone with warmth she had helped create. Ahead, the market waited cold and half awake. Hannah pulled the gray scarf tighter, lifted the bundle against her chest, and began walking before dawn, unaware that the north was already watching the road. Greyhaven Market looked like a village of lanterns trying to survive the snow. Stalls lined the square in uneven rows, their canvas roofs sagging beneath white powder, their counters crowded with ribbons, winter apples, carved toys, candles, and folded cloth brought out early for the royal procession. Merchants stamped their boots and blew into their hands. Servants hurried between wagons with baskets on their arms. Somewhere near the center fountain, musicians were tuning strings with numb fingers, practicing a welcome song for a king who was supposed to arrive after sunrise. Hannah kept to the edge of the square, the bundle of old linens held close to her chest, and the thin gray scarf wrapped tight around her shoulders. The cold had worked through her dress during the walk, settling into her bones until even her thoughts felt slow. Still, she found a small place near a candle cellar and arranged the linens neatly on a crate. The cracked tea set went beside them. The old boots, polished as well as she could manage, sat at the front. If she sold everything, Marjorie might let her stand near the kitchen stove for 10 minutes when she returned. It was a small hope, but small hopes were the kind Hannah knew how to carry. A little bell rang as the first buyer paused, frowned at the tea set, and moved on. Another woman picked up a linen napkin, rubbed the worn corner between 2 fingers, and asked a price so low Hannah could only nod. Better something than nothing. Better obedience than another lecture. She was folding the remaining cloth when she heard a tiny sound from the alley beside the bakery, a sniffle quickly swallowed. Hannah looked over. A little servant girl stood half-hidden behind a stack of flour sacks, no older than 8 or 9, with red cheeks and arms wrapped around herself. Her dress was too thin for the weather, and her shoes were wet through. People passed within 2 feet of her without seeing her at all. Hannah knew that kind of invisibility. It had a temperature. It felt exactly like this. She glanced toward the road back to the Whitaker house, then at the bundle she was supposed to sell, then down at the scarf on her own shoulders. It was all she had left. The thought came honestly. So did the next one. The child was smaller. Hannah walked to the alley and crouched enough to meet the girl's eyes. Are you lost? The girl shook her head, trying to look braver than she was. Waiting for my aunt. She sells pies near the east gate. Her teeth chattered around the words. Hannah did not ask why the aunt had left her there. She already knew people always had reasons when they failed the helpless. She unwound the gray scarf from her shoulders and placed it around the child, tucking the ends gently under her chin. There, keep this until she comes back. The girl's eyes widened. But you will be cold. Hannah smiled faintly. I have been cold before. Across the aisle, a tall man in a black travel cloak stood near the horse stalls, one gloved hand resting on a post. Snow clung to his shoulders, and the hood shadowed most of his face, but Hannah felt his attention before she looked up. He was white-skinned, broad-shouldered, and still in a way that made the busy market seem restless around him. His gray eyes, pale as winter morning, watched her not with pity, but with a focus that made her chest tighten. She looked away first, embarrassed by being seen doing something that would surely be called foolish if Claire heard of it. The little girl touched the scarf as if it were velvet. Thank you, miss. Hannah, she said softly. My name is Hannah. The child smiled, and that was enough. For one brief moment, the cold did not win. Then Claire's voice cut across the market like a cracked bell. There she is. Hannah turned. Claire was coming through the snow in her ivory cloak, Marjorie at her side, both dressed for admiration and looking at Hannah as if she had been caught stealing instead of giving. Claire's gaze dropped to the child, then to Hannah's bare shoulders. Her smile sharpened. You gave it away. Marjorie's face went hard. The last decent thing we allowed you to keep, and you gave it away. Hannah stood slowly. She needed it. You needed to sell our goods and come home, Marjorie said. Instead, you play saint in the street. The tall stranger near the horse stalls did not move, but Hannah felt the air around him grow colder. Claire stepped closer, lowering her voice enough to sound crueler. She gives away scraps because scraps are all she is. The child flinched under the scarf. Hannah moved slightly in front of her, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to block the wind. Marjorie's eyes shifted to the silver locket at Hannah's throat. Something calculating entered her expression. If you are so eager to lose what little you own, she said, then perhaps we should sell something that still has value. Her hand reached toward the locket, and Hannah's whole body went still. Marjorie's fingers stopped an inch from the silver locket, but the threat had already touched Hannah more deeply than any hand could. The market noise seemed to fall away. The tuning strings, the creak of cart wheels, the murmur of merchants opening their stalls, all of it faded beneath the sudden pounding of Hannah's heart. Her mother's locket rested at the hollow of her throat, small and cold and familiar, the only thing in the world no one had managed to turn into a chore, a debt, or a favor. Hannah stepped back. No, the word came out quiet, but it was the first true refusal she had given Marjorie in years. Claire's eyebrows lifted with delighted disbelief. Did you hear that, Mother? The poor Omega found a voice. A few nearby shoppers slowed. Then a few more. Nothing gathered a crowd faster than someone small daring to resist someone powerful. Marjorie's expression hardened, not with rage, but with embarrassment, which Hannah had learned was far more dangerous in public. That locket was kept in my house, Marjorie said. Fed by my fire. Protected under my roof. If you insist on wasting family property by giving away scarves in the street, then something must replace the loss. Hannah's hand closed over the locket. It was my mother's. Your mother left debts, not treasures. The words landed sharply enough that Hannah nearly forgot the cold. Claire stepped beside a merchant's table and picked up one of the old linens Hannah had arranged. Look at all this. Worn cloth, cracked cups, boots older than I am. And still she clings to a little silver box like she is some lost princess. Laughter moved through the watching crowd, soft at first, then easier when no one stopped it. The servant girl behind Hannah clutched the gray scarf tighter, her eyes wide with guilt. Hannah felt that and hated it most. The child had done nothing wrong, yet shame was already trying to find the smallest person in the square. Hannah turned slightly, shielding her from the stares. Please leave her out of this. Claire smiled, still protecting scraps. Marjorie held out her hand. The locket, Hannah. Now. Hannah shook her head. Snow gathered in her hair and on the shoulders of her old blue dress. Without the scarf, The wind cut straight through the fabric, but her fingers did not loosen. You sold my blanket. You may sell the linens. You may sell the boots. But not this. A murmur passed through the crowd, different this time. Not kind, exactly, but uncertain. The tall stranger near the horse stalls remained still, his black cloak dusted with snow, his pale gray eyes fixed on Marjorie with a coldness that did not belong to any ordinary traveler. Hannah did not look at him for help. She had spent too many years learning not to expect rescue. Marjorie noticed the crowd's hesitation and changed her voice into something sorrowful. You see how difficult she is. We give her shelter. We give her work. We bring her to market, and she humiliates us before the royal procession. Claire leaned closer, her words clear enough for the front row to hear. She has no blanket, no dowry, no scent, and still thinks she owns memories. The old shame rose in Hannah's throat, but this time it met something stronger. She thought of the empty attic bed, the child's cold hands, her mother's voice telling her winter only felt endless when no one loved you through it. Memories are not yours to price, Hannah said. The crowd went still. Marjorie's face flushed. She reached again, but before she could touch the chain, a gloved hand placed a silver coin on the merchant's counter with a sound so clean it cut through the square. Not thrown, not offered. Set down with absolute control. Everyone turned. The stranger in the black travel cloak stood beside the stall, tall and white-skinned, snow melting along his shoulders, his face calm in a way that made anger look childish. If there is a debt, he said, name it. Marjorie blinked, startled by the interruption. This is family business. No, the stranger said. This became public when you made her dignity a market display. Claire scoffed, recovering first. And who are you to interfere? The stranger's gaze did not leave Hannah. Someone who heard her say no. The locket warmed suddenly beneath Hannah's palm, so faint she wondered if grief had imagined it. The merchant behind the counter stared at the silver coin, his eyes widening as he noticed the northern crest stamped into its face. Before he could speak, a distant horn sounded from the road beyond the market gate. The royal welcome was beginning early. Marjorie's hand dropped from the locket. Claire turned pale, and the stranger slowly removed one black glove, revealing a ring marked with the crowned wolf of the north. The ring caught the lantern light, and Greyhaven Market fell into a silence so complete that Hannah could hear snow touching the canvas roofs above the stalls. The crowned wolf of the north was carved into black silver, unmistakable even to those who had only seen it stamped on royal notices and tax seals. The merchant behind the counter lowered his head first, then the candle seller beside him. Then the musicians near the fountain stopped tuning and bowed so quickly one of the wooden cases slipped from a bench. The movement spread through the square in a trembling wave. Marjorie's face lost all its careful color. Claire's lips parted, but no sound came. Hannah remained standing because her knees had forgotten what bowing meant. The stranger in the black travel cloak was not a traveler. The man who had watched her give away her last scarf, the man who had heard her say no, was Alpha King Callum Blackthorn. He did not announce himself with thunder. He did not need to. The cold authority around him made every banner, every lantern, every polished display feel suddenly small. His pale gray eyes moved from the locket under Hannah's hand to Marjorie's outstretched fingers, then to Claire's ivory cloak, thick with satin ribbon bought from the sale of Hannah's blanket. Stand, he said to Hannah. She blinked, realizing she had begun to lower herself only because everyone else had. His voice softened by the smallest degree. Not for this. The words struck something fragile inside her. Not for this. Not for being shamed. Not for protecting what was hers. Not for standing cold in a market while others priced her memories. Hannah stayed upright, though her breath trembled. The little servant girl behind her clutched the gray scarf with both hands and stared at the king as if he had stepped from a storybook. Marjorie found her voice at last, thin but polished. Your Majesty, if I had known it was you, I would never have allowed such an unpleasant scene to unfold. Callum looked at her. The scene did not become unpleasant because I saw it. Marjorie went still. Claire tried to recover with a graceful dip of her head. Your Majesty, Hannah is emotional. She misunderstands discipline as cruelty. Callum's gaze shifted to Claire's cloak. That ribbon was bought with her blanket. Claire's face flushed. It was old wool. Hardly suitable. For whom? The question was quiet. Claire looked confused. Callum stepped closer, snow sliding from his black cloak. Hardly suitable for the daughter who needed warmth, or hardly suitable for the family that wanted to appear generous while selling it. No one in the market breathed loudly enough to be heard. Hannah's fingers tightened over the locket. She wanted to disappear and be seen at the same time, and the ache of that contradiction nearly brought tears to her eyes. Callum turned back to her. "Why did you give your scarf to the child?" Hannah looked at the girl, then at the scarf around her small shoulders. The answer felt simple enough to be embarrassing. "Because I know what it feels like to be cold and unseen." The king's expression did not change much, but the air around him did. Something in it lowered, not in anger, but in recognition. The distant royal horn sounded again, closer now, and several northern riders appeared at the market gate, their black and silver cloaks bright against the snow. They stopped when they saw their king already in the square. Callum removed his own cloak clasp. The market watched as the heavy black fabric, lined in silver and warmed by the body of the northern ruler, slipped from his shoulders. Marjorie's breath caught. Claire looked as if she finally understood something was being taken from her that she could not buy back. Callum stepped toward Hannah, stopping just close enough to ask with his eyes before he moved. She gave the smallest nod. Then the Alpha King placed his cloak over her shoulders. Warmth surrounded her all at once, deep and steady, carrying the scent of winter pine, clean snow, and distant firelight. Hannah closed her eyes for one heartbeat, not because she was weak, but because she had forgotten warmth could be given without a price. When she opened them, every face in the market was looking at her. Callum stood beside her and faced Greyhaven. "You dressed your homes in comfort and sent her into winter," he said. "If her family could not spare her warmth, the North will." Beneath the cloak, Hannah's silver locket began to glow. The glow began beneath Hannah's fingers, soft at first, like candlelight trapped inside the silver locket. She looked down as warmth spread through the tiny oval shape at her throat, spilling pale light across the black cloak now resting on her shoulders. The market did not move. Snow continued to fall, but even that seemed slower, quieter, as if the morning itself had paused to watch. Callum Blackthorne saw the light and went completely still, not with surprise alone, with recognition. His pale gray eyes lowered to the locket, then rose to Hannah's face, and for the first time since he had revealed the royal ring, the cold control in him shifted into something almost careful. "Where did you get that?" he asked. Hannah touched the locket as if it might vanish. "My mother left it to me." Marjorie drew in a sharp breath. Callum heard it. So did Hannah. The sound was too small for the crowd, but too large for truth. The king turned his head slightly. "You know this locket." Marjorie shook her head, but her eyes had already answered. "It is an old family trinket. Sentimental nonsense. Hannah has always exaggerated its value." The locket brightened. A thin line of silver opened along its edge, revealing a tiny engraved star inside the metal. The northern riders at the gate dismounted as one. One of them whispered something Hannah could not catch, but the way he lowered his head made the crowd ripple with unease. Claire stepped back, clutching her satin cloak. "This is some Omega trick," she said, though her voice lacked its usual shine. Callum did not look at her. "No," he spoke the word like a door closing. "This is a seal." Hannah's heart beat hard beneath the cloak. A seal. A Luna seal from the old northern houses. His voice remained quiet, but every person in Greyhaven Market seemed to lean toward it. Few survived the winter border years. Fewer were hidden well enough to pass as jewelry. Marjorie's face tightened at the word hidden. Hannah felt the ground shift beneath her in a way no snow could explain. For years, she had been told her mother was a burden, a woman with debts and unfortunate dreams. Yet the king looked at the locket as if it belonged in a history that had been stolen, not discarded. "What was my mother's full name?" Hannah asked. Marjorie stared at her. "This is not the place. You made the market the place when you tried to sell what she left me." The words came from Hannah before fear could soften them. The little servant girl behind her smiled through wide eyes. Callum's expression changed, just barely, and Hannah felt the approval in his silence. Marjorie swallowed. "Elena Whitaker." The locket flashed so brightly that Claire gasped. Callum's gaze sharpened. "That is not the name sealed in the metal." He lifted his hand, not touching Hannah, only holding his palm near the locket as if asking permission from something older than both of them. Hannah nodded once. The locket opened fully. Inside, beneath the tiny star, Words appeared in silver script, Elena Vale of the Northern Moonline. A hush fell over the market, so deep it seemed to reach the rooftops. Hannah could not breathe. Vale. Not Whitaker. Not Charity. Not a girl who owned nothing. Her mother had a name they had buried under chores, debts, and cold rooms. Marjorie's shoulders sagged as if the lie had finally grown too heavy to carry. Callum looked at Hannah, and the space between them filled with the scent of winter pine, white flowers, warm honey, and clean snow. The cloak around her shoulders seemed to recognize her before she recognized herself. Several wolves in the crowd lowered their heads, not because Callum commanded it, but because something in Hannah had awakened and asked for no permission. Callum's voice softened. Your warmth was never weakness. It was inheritance. Hannah's eyes burned, but she did not cry. The child still wore her gray scarf. The market still held the cracked cups and worn linens she had been ordered to sell. But the locket at her throat shone like a small northern star, and for the first time, Hannah understood that the things they took from her had never been the source of her worth. The name Vale moved through Greyhaven Market like a wind no wall could stop. It slipped between the stalls, across the bowed heads of northern riders, past the musicians frozen beside the fountain, and into every face that had watched Hannah shiver without wondering why. Marjorie stared at the open locket as if the silver script had accused her aloud. Claire's hand tightened over the satin ribbon at her throat, the same ribbon bought with Hannah's blanket, and for the first time all morning, she looked less beautiful than frightened of what beauty could not fix. Hannah could barely hear the market over the sound of her own breathing. Elena Vale of the Northern Moonline. The words did not feel like a crown. They felt like a door opening onto a room she had been told did not exist. Her mother had not come from nowhere. Her mother had not left her nothing. The truth had been resting against Hannah's heart for years, waiting beneath cold fabric, unpaid labor, and the soft cruelty of people who called control protection. Callum stood beside her, the black cloak still heavy around her shoulders. He did not speak over her shock. He let her stand inside it. That kindness, more than the royal ring or the bowed guards, made Hannah's eyes burn. Marjorie finally found her voice. Your Majesty, whatever that old engraving says, Hannah was raised in my household. We sheltered her when no one else came forward. Surely you understand that young Omegas can become confused by stories and symbols. Callum turned toward her with the stillness of a northern lake before ice breaks. She asked you for the truth of her mother's name. Marjorie swallowed. There were reasons. There are always reasons when people want to lie to sound noble. The words were quiet, but Marjorie flinched as if every shopper in the square had heard the years behind them. Hannah looked at her stepmother, and the fear that had once made her small no longer found the same place to live. Did you know? She asked. All these years, did you know my mother was from the north? Marjorie's eyes flicked toward the locket, then away. Your mother was running from trouble. That is not an answer. Claire stepped forward, desperate to pull the world back into a shape she understood. Why does it matter now? A name does not change what she is. She is still the girl who scrubbed our floors. She is still poor. She is still an Omega. The final word hung in the cold air, meant to reduce Hannah to something small and familiar. But beneath the cloak, the locket glowed warmer, and the scent around Hannah deepened. White flowers under fresh snow, honey warmed near a hearth, pine branches after morning frost. The crowd felt it. Hannah saw it in the way wolves lifted their heads, then lowered them again, not in fear, but in instinctive respect. Callum inhaled once, sharply enough that only Hannah noticed. His pale gray eyes moved to hers, and the world narrowed until the market, the snow, and every cruel voice seemed far away. Something answered inside her, not loud, not demanding, but certain. It was not possession. It was recognition. A bond finding the shape of a soul it had already been searching for. Callum stepped back half a pace, giving her room the instant he sensed her breath catch. That small restraint steadied her. He faced the market. No one here will use her rank as an insult again. Claire lowered her eyes, but anger still trembled in her mouth. Marjorie tried one last time. She belongs to our house. Callum's expression hardened. A family does not sell the last thing keeping a daughter warm. The sentence cut through the square with the clean force of truth. Hannah looked at the child still wrapped in her gray scarf, then at the old linens on the crate, the cracked tea set, the boots, the pieces of a life she had been ordered to trade away. She touched the open locket, and the tiny silver words shone brighter beneath her fingers. "I do not belong to a house that only remembers me when I am useful," she said. Her voice shook, but it did not break. Callum looked at her then, and the cold king softened just enough for her to see the man beneath the throne. "Then choose what happens next, Hannah Vale." Her new name, spoken by him, felt like warmth entering a room long sealed against winter. The royal riders at the gate bowed lower. The market waited. For the first time in her life, no one reached for her, priced her, corrected her, or decided for her. They only waited while the girl they had left cold remembered she had a choice. Hannah's choice did not come all at once. It rose slowly, like dawn behind a mountain, touching one truth after another until the whole shape of her life became visible. She looked at Marjorie, at the woman who had taken her mother's name and folded it away like an inconvenient letter. She looked at Claire, wrapped in satin warmth bought from Hannah's last blanket, still waiting for the world to remember which girl was supposed to matter. She looked at the little servant child, safe inside the gray scarf, and at the old goods on the crate that suddenly seemed too small to hold the weight of what had happened. Then Hannah looked down at the open locket. Elena Vale of the Northern Moonline. Her mother's name glowed in tiny silver letters, no longer hidden, no longer begging to be believed. "I want the truth," Hannah said. Her voice was quiet, but it traveled through the market as clearly as the royal horn. "Not the version that made me useful. Not the version that made me grateful for less than kindness. The truth." Marjorie's face tightened. "You are overwhelmed." Hannah shook her head. The black cloak shifted around her shoulders, warm and steady. "No, I am awake." Callum Blackthorne did not smile, but something in his pale gray eyes deepened, as if those 3 words had reached past the king and found the man who had been waiting in silence. He turned to the royal riders at the gate. "The Northern Archives will be opened for Elena Vale's daughter. Every record, every witness, every sealed letter." One of the riders bowed. "As you command, Your Majesty." Claire made a small, disbelieving sound. "You cannot simply take her." Callum looked back at Hannah before answering, and that mattered. He did not claim her over her own voice. He waited until she held his gaze. Hannah felt the bond between them again, quiet beneath the noise of the market, like warmth through a closed door. It asked nothing. It only existed, patient and certain. "He is not taking me," she said. "I am leaving." The words should have frightened her. Instead, they loosened something around her ribs. Around the square, wolves lowered their heads, some reluctantly, some with shame, some with the stunned humility of those who had watched a girl become visible too late. Marjorie stepped forward, but the royal guards moved only their attention, and she stopped. "Hannah," she said, using softness like a tool, "where will you go? You have no room there, no place, no preparation for northern court life." Hannah glanced at the cloak covering her thin dress, then at the locket glowing over her heart. "I had no place here either." The answer left Marjorie silent. The child in the gray scarf stepped forward and held up the folded corner of the fabric. "Miss Hannah, your scarf." Hannah knelt in the snow, bringing herself to the child's height. "Keep it." The girl's eyes widened. "But you need it." Hannah touched the edge of Callum's cloak, feeling the warmth she had not had to earn. Not anymore. When she stood, the locket brightened again, and the scent of white flowers, warm honey, pine, and clean snow drifted across the market. Callum drew one slow breath, and Hannah saw him steady himself with the same discipline he used before a crowd. The recognition between them was growing stronger, but he still kept his hands to himself, still gave her room to choose each step. That restraint felt like safety. The royal horn sounded once more from the northern road, not as a warning now, but as an invitation. Callum offered his arm, palm open, formal and respectful. "May I escort you, Hannah Vale?" Her old name trembled somewhere behind her, small and fading. Whitaker had been a roof, a chore, a debt she never finished paying. Vale felt like a window opening towards snow-bright mountains she had never seen, but somehow remembered. Hannah placed her hand lightly on his arm. "Yes, Your Majesty." His gaze softened. "Callum, when you are ready." She did not answer yet, but the possibility warmed her more than the cloak. Together, they turned from the market stall, leaving the cracked cups, worn boots, and unsold linens behind. Behind them, Claire stared at the satin ribbon on her cloak as if it had become heavier than shame. Ahead, The northern riders made a path through falling snow. And as Hannah took her first step away from the life that had kept her cold, the locket whispered open a second hidden line beneath her mother's name. The light returns when the daughter chooses home. The northern road opened before Hannah like something from a story her mother had never lived long enough to tell. Snow drifted across the market square in soft white ribbons, settling on the canvas roofs, the wagon wheels, the folded linens she no longer had to sell, and the footprints of every person who had watched her choose herself. Callum Blackthorne walked beside her with the measured calm of a king, but he did not hurry her. His black cloak stayed warm around her shoulders, heavy with silver trim and the scent of pine, clean snow, and distant firelight. Each step carried Hannah farther from the stall where her locket had almost been sold, farther from Claire's sharp smile, farther from Marjorie's careful lies. Yet she did not feel like she was running. She felt like she was finally walking in the direction her life had been waiting to face. At the market gate, the northern riders stood beside their horses, heads bowed as Hannah approached. The little servant girl remained near the candle stall, wrapped in Hannah's gray scarf, one small hand raised in a shy farewell. Hannah raised her hand back. That was when Claire spoke behind her, her voice thinner than before. "You will regret this. The North will not love you just because of a name." Hannah stopped, not because the words had power, but because they no longer did. She turned beneath the falling snow. Claire stood beside Marjorie in her ivory cloak, satin ribbon bright against the white morning. For a moment, Hannah saw the blanket folded at the foot of her attic bed, felt the cold room, heard Marjorie say usefulness mattered more than comfort. Then she looked down at the royal cloak around her shoulders and the silver locket glowing against her heart. "Maybe not," Hannah said, "but I would rather learn the truth in a cold palace than stay warm in a house built on lies." The market held its breath. Marjorie's face trembled between anger and fear. "Hannah, please. We are still family." The word family reached for her like an old habit, but it found no place to grip. Hannah's voice softened, not with forgiveness yet, but with freedom. A family does not sell the last thing keeping a daughter warm. Callum did not speak. He did not need to. He stood beside her as witness, not owner, not rescuer claiming a prize, but the first person that morning who had given her room to decide what her dignity was worth. Hannah turned back to the road. One of the northern horses, a tall gray mare with a silver bridle, lowered its head as she approached. Callum offered his hand, palm open. "Only if you choose." Hannah looked at the horse, then at the road beyond the gate, where pine trees rose dark and beautiful beneath the winter sky. She placed her hand in his. The bond between them warmed gently, not as a command, but as a promise waiting for trust. He helped her mount with careful strength, then stepped back until she settled herself. The locket opened one final time beneath the dawn, and the hidden line inside shone clear enough for her to read without fear. "The light returns when the daughter chooses home." Hannah closed her fingers over it and smiled, small but real. Callum mounted his black horse beside her, tall and silent in the snow, the crowned wolf ring bright against his glove. The royal horn sounded once across Greyhaven, deep and steady, not announcing conquest, but departure. As the northern riders moved forward, the market parted. Some bowed. Some looked away. Some finally saw her too late. Hannah did not look back again until they reached the rise beyond the square. From there, the Whitaker house was only a warm cluster of windows in the distance, beautiful from far away and colder than any winter inside. She let it become small behind her. Ahead, the northern road curved toward mountains hidden in silver mist, toward archives that held her mother's name, toward a king who had covered her with warmth and then waited for her choice. Hannah touched the cloak, the locket, and the place in her chest where hope had begun to breathe. By sunrise, Greyhaven had lost the girl it had kept cold. By morning, the North had found its Luna.